Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thank you for joining us. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as usual, by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Josh.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Welcome to you. And let me just say, I'm glad that the three of us are together, because when we're living life to the fullest, I think we're a good example of why life is a beautiful thing, if I may say. That might sound weird, but I'll explain.
Please do.
So today, obviously, we're talking about a topic that's quite serious, actually. But, you know, when we're talking about the Fifth Commandment, thou shalt not kill. And in so many ways, life in general is such under attack. There's the respect for life in so many ways, in so many different areas, is just disregarded in such horrible ways. And I think when people live in communion with one another, people live their life to the fullest, people live their vocation. It's a beautiful witness to the beauty that God has given us in life. So today we're going to talk about that Fifth Commandment, thou shalt not kill. And I think we're going to talk about some exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
Even though the commandment says thou shalt not kill, there are some exceptions to that. And we're going to talk about what areas there are no exceptions on that. I got serious.
You did.
There.
We got
no exceptions.
there are some. I think it's an important distinction right off the bat. When the Bible says "Thou shalt not kill," if you look at the actual translation, it's actually more correctly translated to "Thou shalt not murder."
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of an important distinction, because if it was to not kill, then when I hit the mosquito on my arm, I'm causing a great sin against the 10th commandment, right? Yeah. But thou shalt not murder something. Fifth commandment. Sorry, I said 10th.
Maybe the 10th as well, but
but specifically, I covered my blood. You know, whatever it is. The idea, though, being that thou shalt not murder, so it brings the intent of killing to something different. Murder having specific intent, having and doing it for a reason. The church lays out very specific areas where killing is allowed or is permissible, I should say, maybe is the right word.
Yeah, I think that's the right way of putting it, permissible, because it's seldom or never the case where, you know, the church actually says, you know, killing is a moral good.
Yes,
like
yeah,
that is you know, you're talking about something that is permitted by circumstance. But coming back to what you said about like kind of the biblical translation, a lot of people will say like, well, because like if you get into kind of biblical language debates, that it's like, well, Hebrew only has, you know, so many words. So, you know, the same word for kill and murder, and like, you know, a lot of times the same Hebrew word is translated as several words. But like even in kind of Old Testament Hebrew, there are two different words. So like the word for killing is harag, and the word for murder is ratza. And, you know, in the Ten Commandments, the word ratza is used. So it does specify kind of murder in the translation. Killing. So there's a good kind of linguistic case for that it just doesn't apply to killing more broadly. Also, the context that the Old Testament is written in, you know, you have the Israelites existing within, you know, a number of warring nations. So, you know, circumstantially, you know, that wasn't an option. And if you look at kind of the history of the Israelites from that point, you know, there are a number of kind of military situations where, you know, killing is
going to happen.
At the very least permissible.
Yeah.
so that's an excellent distinction. Thou shalt not murder. So in that case, so you've already mentioned swatting a mosquito.
Yeah.
In that sense too, like what about killing other animals?
Yeah, and God gave us animals to use, right? And so we talk about that in the Genesis and everything else. So eating of animals is totally permissible, allowed. Even the case that while killing wasn't allowed, or murdering, I should say, was not allowed, God still required in the Old Testament, after He gave those laws, He still required sacrifice, where it instructed the Israelites to kill a bull or a pigeon or a lamb, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And so those are still, like, obviously there's a difference there. And so we're talking about human deaths. We're talking about murdering specifically.
Yeah, and the Council of Trent actually clarified that thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder refers to human beings and not animals. However, did you know that it is permissible, I guess, to kill animals, but it's still sinful to torture
Yeah,
animals.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Still it's for torture.
I think anybody who hunts or like myself, I grew up on a farm. I have a farm, and I do my own. I kill and eat my own meat. I clean my own meat myself. But I think most of the people I've ever talked to, hunting, fishing, and farmers, there's a respect for taking a life. There really is a deep respect for that, and that you do it swiftly, quickly, without pain, without torture. That kind of thing.
Okay, so that would be one exception. I don't even know if we can call them exceptions to the rule.
No,
but the other one would be something that's, I guess, a little more, I don't know about controversial, but it's capital punishment or the death penalty. And this comes with a bunch of asterisks, I would say.
Yeah.
So I think at the very beginning, it came with a bunch of asterisks because there are obligations that a person has to protecting the innocent. And so sometimes that means protecting the innocent from someone who is a serial killer, who is killing and has been proven that they cannot be rejuvenated, that they will kill again. And in olden day times, I'm going to say, where you didn't really have a way to prevent this from happening other than maybe trying to tie them up, but they could get free. You know what I mean? Like you put them in a cage of some sorts but there's a chance, or they've proven that they can get out and that they can go on another killing rampage. The church allows or says permissible to protect the common good of the people, is that that capital punishment in this case is allowed, or to restrict the person from being able to kill again. So there is other cases where they talk about like just taking the arms off the person, but back again, like you're looking 200 years ago, that probably means death, and that might be more torturous than just killing the person, beheading or hanging or whatever the case may be. And so the church at that time has said in very specific circumstances, for the greater good, it is common. But the Pope came out with something not too long ago, and the idea there is being that in today's society, there's very few chances that we don't have the jail cells to be able to hold a person that they can't escape.
Right.
There's like there isn't the same onus, or it isn't the same fear that the person's going to get out and kill again necessarily. Yeah. We have jails, we have facilities that we can lock the person up on their own for the rest of their life, and to know that that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, and if we want to maintain this like distinction between killing and murder, that the church has always tried to navigate between, as you said, kind of maintaining public safety. Public authorities have an obligation to maintain public safety, but also recognize and preserve the dignity of human life. That this modification that the Pope made to the Catechism is really saying that we have the capability of incarceration now, so we can preserve the common good. Like we can maintain public safety in a way that we no longer require the death penalty in order to do that. And you could argue in some places of the world that's not an option. Yeah. And you can kind of have a moral debate about whether or not it's permissible there. But really, like the goal of the church in a situation where you have incarceration, the death penalty is the equivalent of murder. Not just killing, because there is kind of an active agency there. You're denying the dignity of the individual human life. So again, we want to make sure that we're kind of navigating successfully between these points. That we want to recognize kind of moral obligation to respect and maintain the dignity of another's life.
You're also you're denying them the chance at being able to redemption. Yeah, exactly. So being able to come back to understand what they've done wrong, to ask for forgiveness for their sins. You're cutting their time short when and so giving them that opportunity as well, because we do believe in forgiveness. We do believe in second chances. We are a church that believes that, and so giving the person as much possibility of coming back from their fallen away state. And to me, that's a way that the church shows hope, and in all situations, right? It's not just a bad thing, it's hope. Now, the heinous crimes, obviously there are people that would feel safer if that person was maybe passed away or dead or whatever the case may be. So but we can lock them up, they're never going to get out. That's the option the church is going to shoot for.
And that's a good distinction, because this amendment to the Catechism of the Catholic Church happened in 2018.
Yeah.
People said, well, there goes Pope Francis changing the Catechism, right?
Yeah.
But it was always that. It was always with the understanding. It was considered the appropriate way to deal with someone who committed a heinous crime.
Exactly.
And was still at risk of endangering the common good. Right? So that was like the solution to the problem, to protect the common good. But now technology, or security, I should say, has enhanced in such a way that
It's not really an issue.
killing someone is not the only way to keep them away from
Yes.
people. Right?
Yeah, and I think that is an important distinction, specifically as we battled the question in the Western culture. You know, because capital punishment is allowed. Are we allowed to kill somebody for whatever they've done? And so the Pope weighing in on that, saying this is what the Church teaches. I don't think he's necessarily changing it, but
Right.
pointing out the fact that this has always been what the Church teaches, and to make it clear.
Yeah.
We have this capabilities now.
Today,
So
those
yeah.
situations have changed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's another, sort of
Yeah.
exception, I guess. I don't know. What about a just war?
Oh, I like this one because this is actually one that I always kind of like. We hear a lot about crusades with the Catholic Church. We hear a lot about, like you suggested with the Israelites, always kind of going to war. Like, do not kill, but go invade this land and take over everything and kill all the men and kill all the wives and children and the cows and whatever. So the just war, there has to be a good enough reason. Yeah. You can't just go and invade a country and call it a just war. There's actual specific guidelines when it comes to what is a just war. And so, but one of the things I do like about the church points out that we, again, we have an obligation to stand for the innocents, to protect, and specifically calling all men and women to that stance of, if you are able to stop someone from hurting someone else, you will not only are supposed to, you're obligated to, meaning like you are going to go out of your way to stop this from happening. Yeah. And so in a just war scenario is kind of where this teaching kind of comes to play.
Yeah, I think we did an episode on just war theory, but just in short, like the criteria for what qualifies a just war is very high. The bar is very high, and very few wars in history actually kind of meet that threshold. And even something like the Crusades, you could make a case for the first Crusade or the first two Crusades, but the third and fourth Crusade were kind of far outside that. Even kind of the World Wars, you could say that some countries' involvement met that criteria, met that threshold. Others didn't. So again, it's a really, really high bar for what the Church says. It's like, okay, this is a context for just war. But even it applies to even just kind of public law enforcement. If it's your job to maintain public safety and security, and you have to make decisions in split seconds and assess situations. There are situations where again, it's not only kind of morally permissible, it might be the right thing to do, or the right action to
if you have to take a life in order to save life, then
even that becomes complicated, because you don't necessarily want to do this kind of utilitarian calculus where one life is proportionally equal to whatever. Like the
difference
dignity,
I think that the Church uses is innocent life.
Yeah.
So if you need to take a guilty life in order to protect an innocent life, then right? Is that kind of
yes, and the goal there is always for the common good, or maintaining public safety, and again, we get into kind of murky water when we're talking about like measuring the value of lives against other lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, another sort of exception, I guess, would be self-defense, because it's kind of going along this
same idea.
topic, self-defense.
Because in that case, I would suggest that you're innocent. You're the innocent life that you're protecting yourself against.
That's right.
And again, the goal here would be to restrain a person to.
That's right.
To
it doesn't mean that you have the right to kill someone.
No, in self-defense.
If there's another way to mitigate the situation.
That's right. Like, so if you pit me against a 10-year-old child,
right,
I probably should be able to pin them down and hold them and stop the whatever would happen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But when you're talking about another person that could, like, that might be the only way to prevent, then it, again, every other avenue possible. But if that's the last potential option, then it's permissible.
The same thing. If you're a police officer, or if you're in a situation of self-defense, you use requisite and proportional force.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other, I think, would be like a death by an accident. when it's really an accident. Someone doesn't take like the guilt of it. Now, if it's strictly an accident. Now, if it's an accident due to someone's negligence,
That's different.
Let's say
Yeah.
someone is drinking and driving and crashes into someone and kills them. That's a different
that's
story.
different, yeah.
But if it's an accident,
Yeah. So like by accident, I mean, if you were driving and you hit a piece of ice on the highway and then you ended up spinning out of control and resulting
no
car
fault of your own,
exactly
hits another car.
exactly that and that results in death, you're not penalized with that death that's accidental, right? Even if it's an accident, even if it's something you trip and fall down the stairs, you end up hitting out somebody else halfway down the stairs and pushing them down the rest of the stairs and they die. Same thing, if you're not intentionally trying to do it, it is death by accident, meaning that the weight of death isn't on your soul. It's not permissible.
You're not morally culpable for
exactly
that.
Exactly.
yeah so
okay, so those are sort of exceptions. I hate to say exceptions to the rule.
no, but
it's not like,
where the church allows.
There's exactly where there's no guilt, I guess, of the act.
Yeah,
right?
there's no implicit rejection of the dignity
That's
of the
right.
life that.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's
Sanctity
not
of
like
life.
a celebration of an end to something. But yeah, what about? So I think because some of these are known, some of these like people know that maybe an accident is not you're not at fault for it or at guilt for it. And this sort of blurs the line into other areas.
Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
see today, like what the church strictly calls murder. If we're talking about the Fifth Commandment, thou shalt not murder. Like, so the church teaches, for example, abortion is murder, right? The church teaches that euthanasia is murder, right? So these are sort of topics that the lines have been blurred because people say, wow, that's kind of an old teaching of the church or whatever.
I think it's really important to distinguish that there's a difference between moral law and legal law. And so, like, for instance, in Germany back in the 40s, it was legally acceptable to do what Hitler did or the Nazis did. They were the people in power. They made the laws. They changed the laws. They were allowed to do it. It was legally allowed. Morally, it wasn't. It was against moral laws, right? And so understanding there's a difference between legal laws, what's legal in a country, and moral laws. A lot of times in our life, I'm going to say, the legal laws and the moral laws seem to go hand in hand a lot of times. And so there, especially when we're living, like we grew up in a Canadian, is a Christian Judeo, our legal system is based on Christian Judeo values. And so a lot of our laws go kind of hand in hand with what we believe. But now we're stepping outside of that. We're getting away from that. And now abortion is legal. And not only is it legal, but our tax dollars pay for it. And same with euthanasia. It's not only legal, but our tax dollars pay for euthanasia to happen in our country. It's a very slippery slope. And so understanding that while it still may be legal, it's not morally legal. It's not morally acceptable in those things. And that's where the church has to take a strong stand. One of the distinctions here is that the church always believes in the sanctity of life. And so we don't believe that a life is a worth of a life isn't based upon the quality of life, and we
or the stage.
or the stage of life. Like it's about the sanctity of life. And so every life is precious, whether that person is living with some sort of disability or not. That life is precious. And I think, like if you look at the areas where the church stands forward and pitches that, it's kind of interesting that they always try to pitch the church as the bad guy when it comes to certain types of lives, but the church always says every life has value, every life has worth. It's the sanctity of life in every situation is worth the same, whether or not they have what we call the quality of a good life. And so when you take the moral aspect out of it, then you have to define what is life worth living for in some other way. And so they've decided to go with quality of life. And so if quality of life is this, that, or the other thing. So the quality of life, so if the baby is going to diminish your quality of life, you can abort it. Or if the baby's not going to have a good quality of life, maybe they're going to be sick or maybe they're going to have some disability of some sorts, then you can abort the baby. But it's quality, not sanctity of life. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely.
As you were saying, kind of, especially in kind of the West in the 20th century, we've experienced this kind of divergence between kind of the moral law and the legal law. And we talked last week about we talked about radical individualism and the idea that like a lot of our relationships have become relationships of exchange, relationships of economy, and one of the contributing factors here is that like we look at people in terms of how useful they are to us, and again it comes down to like boiling down someone's value. Not just being made in the image and likeness of God, their value is their use. They're used to civilization. They're used to their community. So you have kind of in the case of infants, there's the promise of usefulness, and if that promise isn't there, their life is no longer. The perception of the pro-abortion side is that this isn't useful to society. This isn't useful to my family. This life doesn't have value. On the other end of life, when you're talking about kind of euthanasia and, in our kind of Canadian context, the medical assistance in dying, that it's like, okay, well, these people, their quality of life is that, they don't feel like they're contributing. They feel like they're a burden to their family. They're no longer, they no longer identify as useful, so their life no longer has value. They're not looking at it from the perspective of the church to say that, my life has value because God created me.
Yeah.
Like full stop.
It has nothing to do with what you're able to do.
Yeah.
Your life is worth so much just because God loves you, God created you, right? And I think that is the really basic distinction. It's not about what you can do, it's about who you are.
Yeah.
God, Father Mike Schmidt talked about on one of his Catechism in a Year, he talked about that we are stewards of the life that God gave us. We are not the owners of the life that God gave us. And so if you think about it that way, we're not an ownership, meaning we can take the life, but we're stewards of life, meaning that we are granted this life to live to the best of our abilities. And sometimes that means at the end of life is to go through whatever that next step is. And I think that today's society especially, we don't put enough onus on suffering. The grace and the amazing strength that comes out of suffering, even at the end of death, at the last time. This doesn't mean, though, the church actually makes very specific guidelines when it comes to euthanasia specifically. And so it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to help somebody. You don't have to preserve life in all aspects, meaning the person is on ventilation and is getting their blood pumped for them, their body is completely not working, and you are doing everything to keep them alive. That's not what the church is saying. The church is saying that you can't medically assist in the dying, meaning you can't put forward something that should not come naturally. Yeah. And so if it means that you're pulling the plug, the church is not against pulling the plug of someone who's going to be dying if that medical assistance wasn't there. That's a different scenario. So you're totally allowed to someone who has been battling cancer, for instance, and has been battling cancer for a long period of time, and it came back with a vengeance, and they're in stage 4 cancer or whatever else, and the doctor says there's this new drug, we don't know if it works, but I think it's a possibility it could work for you. The person's not obligated to go and try to take that medication to try to keep life. The church allows them to say, you know what? No, I'm done. I'm going to just let God, let the cancer, I'm going to not do all this extra medication stuff. And if cancer takes me, then cancer takes me. They're allowed to say that.
Yeah, it's not by any means necessary to preserve a life.
No.
Right.
But it is to make sure that you are going to the extent of not using something to kill, right?
Absolutely.
To take the life earlier than should.
I think it's really important for people to maybe talk about these things with their family or reflect on them for themselves, because in Canada, especially right now, you were just seeing such a slippery slope with, like we're talking about medical assistance in dying, what we call MAID in Canada, or euthanasia,
and it's legal now.
Right?
So
it's legal since 2016.
And when they first came out to appease the public, there were very strict guidelines and rules, correct?
Right.
And they said things like it will only be in cases that are definitely terminal, that are going to die within the next 6 months. I think when it first started, then we'll allow you. Like, we know without a shadow of a doubt that person's going to die within the next 6 months. That's when this is going to be allowed and legal. And then they slowly started to stretch.
Right.
And so
Yeah. So over time they've kind of expanded their scope in a really, really concerning direction. So in the early days there needs to be a foreseeable and end of life.
Terminal illness
in the diagnosis, and there was also kind of added that this wouldn't be administered in cases of mental illness or with people who don't have the cognitive capacity to actually make this decision. But a few years later, it was expanded to include people with chronic pain or terminal illness. So again, not necessarily having that kind of immediate time horizon. And now, recently has been passed that it can be extended legally. Can be extended to people who are experiencing mental illness, which again should be hugely concerning because again, due to the nature of mental illness, they may not have the faculties, the cognitive capability to make an informed decision. Never mind the fact that a large percentage of mental illness are things like anxiety, depression. These states that are a lot of times preconditions for suicidal ideation. Outside of this kind of medical assistance in dying context. Just from kind of a general medical perspective, these are the people, these are the patients that are at risk for being victims of suicide.
There's so many ridiculous things going on in our country when it comes to this topic. There used to be a time, and I would still say today, as someone who works in schools, there's a lot of effort and resources thrown at suicide prevention. Mm-hmm. Suicide prevention, I guess, for a certain age or a certain...
Well, when they're going to be useful,
right,
as you said.
And then now, we're just opening up the doors to almost encouragement of suicide. Mm-hmm. Instead of providing mental health care, instead of providing these things, or palliative care, palliative care is such a gift in Canada. We just keep opening the doors. There's been so many ridiculous things. Remember there was a veteran suffering from PTSD.
Yeah, who called in, made the news.
They suggested medical assistance in dying to him instead of any support. Then just earlier this year, there was the man who made headlines. He wanted to receive medical assistance in dying because he was homeless.
Yeah, because he couldn't afford a home and anything else, and so
he'd rather just and I don't think I remember seeing the interview with him. Yeah. He says he didn't want to. It wasn't like he preferred to die.
No,
that was
the option.
The best option for him at the time because he couldn't afford anywhere to live. It's just insanity, and so opening the doors to euthanasia or made for people with mental illness was to become law in March of 2023. And someone in the Canadian government thought, well, let's give it one more year. Let's try and work out all the kinks, I guess. Mm-hmm. So we're expected in March 17th of 2024 that this is now going to be law, that people with mental illness can go and apply for medical assistance in dying.
It's something to say, you mentioned palliative care, and I think that's so important to realize. The church is okay with palliative care, and in fact, because they believe in the sanctity of life and making people comfortable as they die, it's totally acceptable for them to have morphine or whatever drugs it is. As long as it's not encouraging them, you don't want to add the extra bit of morphine so they'll die sooner, kind of thing. But giving them pain relief in that time, making them feel comfortable, the church is 100% for that. You kind of said the usefulness of that. What is the usefulness of that person in a government ideal? Well, it's just a lot more extra money to keep them there in a bed and pay for this and whatever. And so you can see that the usefulness isn't, so let's let them die. The person also can feel that, right? Can feel that, well, I'm a burden to my family.
Exactly.
I'm a burden to that. Yeah. But that's where I'm going to say that we have our hospices that I think the church has to get 100%, and the church here locally is 100% behind. But to make the hospices a place of peace for the dying and where people can die with dignity, and again preserving that sanctity of life. Keeping the idea that every single life is worth something, and it helps us understand that we can when we are healthy, to sacrifice a little bit to show that dignity towards the lives that are there and the lives that they have lived. And so going out and visiting those loved ones that we have in the homes that are in palliative care, going out and visiting those people from our church and from our area, visiting the sick is one of those corporal acts of mercy, right? Is taking care of the sick. And so visiting shut-ins, like those are things that we can show the sanctity of life. We can show our respect for the sanctity of life by going out and visiting, and by going out and I'm going to say sacrificing our time, but I don't mean that in a negative way at all. Like more in the sense of giving something freely so that we can go and uphold this life that has been lived, and the friendship and the love that is there.
One of the things that is a little more troubling for medical assistants in dying is that the acceptance of it is actually quite scandalous. Like, now that it's being more widely used, it's almost becoming like an option for people who wouldn't have considered it, right? Like your case, your example there about, well, I'm being a bit of a burden to my family now. No one comes to visit me, whatever. I might as well take this option. Me, as someone who visits the hospitals, visits people, regularly, like they give these pamphlets to people when you're admitted to the hospital. These are options they're giving you as part of your hospital care. Yeah. It is the saddest thing. In 2022, there were 13,241 deaths in Canada to medical assistants in dying. That's 13,200 as from 1,000 deaths in 2016. Every year that it's been law in Canada that you can have a doctor kill you, the percentage has grown 30%.
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah.
It's scary. So we're only going to get worse here. I think it's a conversation people have to have, because when you get admitted to a hospital, or when you are faced with a health issue, it's almost too late, because you're such in a vulnerable state of mind, and doctors are telling you one thing, your family's telling you anything, you're sad, it's a difficult time. Then they throw a pamphlet at you. It's cruel.
And all this suffering. Here you go.
Yeah.
Right?
It's cruel, and I think it's a conversation that has to take place within families, because this is serious. This is serious things. It is a grave sin.
Well, I think let's call it what it is. It's suicide. That's what it is. And so the church has always taught very highly, and I think everybody else, as you said, it's a suicide watch. And then all of a sudden we promote, we discourage it when they're younger, but then encourage it when they're older. I don't quite or when they're no longer useful. Yeah. And that's the problem, right? Is that so understanding that. And looking at the numbers game and realizing, oh, this is a problem. This is like trying to teach people that it's okay to take your life just because this, that, or the other thing. It's, again, not promising people the chance for redemption. We talked about this, like if you hold somebody in incarceration, you're giving them as much time as possible to potentially figure out and turn the other cheek and maybe come back to God or come back to forgiveness, ask for forgiveness, whatever the case may be. You're also doing that in this case here. You're like, you know what I mean? The church is standing by the same teaching in both scenarios. Capital punishment, you're able to hold somebody until they pass away, then do so. And that's the kind of same, like giving people the chance at redemption, of second chances, of turning lives around. I mean, would it kind of be sucking if all of a sudden they, you were told that you had cancer, and then you decided, okay, well, there's no point, I'm going to die in a year to 2 years, and then you killed yourself, and 2 days later they come out with, hey, there's a new drug, it cures all cancer. Like there's always a chance for potential redemption there as well, right? I mean, medically, but specifically for your soul and for spiritually. You're never taking that life away from, never shooting that life. My mom used to always talk about, like, you're like spitting that life back in God's face. You're never doing that. You're saying, God, thank you for this life. Thank you for the fullness of this life. And I want to live it to the fullness and till the end, right? Until you take me home.
Yeah, I think it's something that people need to really consider today, because it's almost happening at a more rapid pace right under our nose, like right in front of us. Like, your children are growing up in a world where it's socially acceptable to kill people who are suffering from a mental illness, or who have something wrong with them, like quote unquote,
who aren't useful,
or who are suffering, or who aren't useful, or who are suffering PTSD, or don't have a home. Like, your children are growing up in a world like that. It's awful.
Yeah.
But that's becoming the norm, or that is the norm.
Yeah.
That is the norm
Yeah.
now. So it's only going to become something a little more heinous. I think we need all people of goodwill, to really get behind palliative care,
Yeah.
to really get behind caring for people in all sort of stages of their life.
Yeah, and I think so it's clearly a violation of the sanctity of human life. So theologically concerning, that's pretty well established. But even people, we need to kind of work as a culture to reverse this, because this is concerning from a legal perspective as well. The Canadian Criminal Code was modified. Because up until a few years ago, it's illegal and criminal to counsel someone to commit suicide. Now we're handing out pamphlets. Up until now, this is concerning for the medical profession, because up until, and I don't know if it's still the case, in order to become a doctor, you had to take the Hippocratic Oath, which is a promise to preserve life and not destroy it, and not to do no harm. And you have. We talked about vows and promises last week. Now you have a lot of doctors in conflict, but my the profession that I'm a part of and the legal system that's regulating that is telling me to do things that are against my the vows and promises that I made when I became a doctor. This is the opposite of what I was trained to do. This is the opposite of healthcare.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to stop our conversation there, because that's all the time we have today. But that's a good little reflection on the Fifth Commandment. Some ways where it's
Thou shalt not kill,
Thou shalt not
except
murder.
sometimes.
Except sometimes. Yep. Drop us a line if you have anything to add to our conversation. You can do that on our social media pages, or you can send us an email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.